which has two lateral lobes that are connected in between with a stretch of tissue called the isthmus. It's just below the larynx, in front of and to the side of the trachea, each side of the trachea, and it has the special ability to remove iodine from the blood. That iodine is used to produce thyroxine and triiodothyronine, or as I will continue to refer to them, T4 for thyroxine and T3 for the other. It also produces a hormone called calcitonin. So the follicular cells produce T3 and T4, while the extracurricular cells, or parafollicular cells produce the calcitonin. The cells right around the follicles. Whoops. Actually, that's a good view of it. These cells around the follicles are producing T3 and T4, while cells out here somewhere are producing the calcitonin. So the thyroid is composed of round secretory units called follicles, and each one of those is surrounded by a single layer of cells, which I just said, kind of not very clearly maybe, but said follicular cells. And within that follicle there is a viscous colloid. That colloid is going to be how we make the thyroid hormones, T3 and T4. Outside those follicles, again, are the extrafollicular cells, or parafollicular cells, they're often called. I think I called them extracurricular a moment ago. So hormones from the thyroid gland, thyroxine has a role for increasing the rate of energy released from carbohydrate, increases rate of protein synthesis, accelerates growth, necessary for normal nervous system maturation. TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone, stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroxine, and it comes from the anterior pituitary gland. T3 is missing an iodide compared to T4, but that makes it much more potent because it has a much higher affinity for its receptor. Other than that, it's a modification of T4. In fact, most of the T4, when it reaches the cells, gets converted to T3. Calcitonin is a strange hormone. It can lower blood calcium and phosphates in concentrations, high concentrations, but its role in I'll leave it at that. And elevated blood calcium will cause the production of calcitonin. Disorders of the thyroid can include those that make too much or too little. Hyperthyroidism, in general, is a high metabolic rate, sensitivity to heat, restlessness, hyperactivity, weight loss, protruding eyes, goiter. Graves' disease is due to autoantibodies, so an autoimmune disease, antibodies against the self, binding to TSH receptors on thyroid cell membrane. They mimic the action of TSH and overstimulate the gland. Hypothyroid diseases would include Hashimoto's, hypothyroidism infantile and adult, and a simple goiter. Hashimoto's, we get antibodies that destroy thyroid cells instead of stimulating them. Infantile hypothyroidism, you would see stunted growth, abnormal bone formation, intellectual disability, and sluggishness. The word cretin comes from hypothyroidism, infantile nature. Hypothyroidism in adult would lead to a low metabolic rate, sensitivity to cold, sluggishness, poor appetite, swollen tissues, and mental dullness. A goiter is a deficiency of thyroid hormones, usually caused by an iodine deficiency. Very rare in the developed world because most countries use iodized salt, but there are places where that still is a problem. So infantile, Graves' disease, and a goiter. Parathyroid glands are on the back surface of the thyroid gland. They're actually in the same structure as the thyroid gland. There are usually 4 of them. They secrete a hormone called parathyroid hormone, And parathyroid hormone is very important for regulating calcium and carbonate regulating calcium concentrations in the blood. Parathyroid hormone increases the level of blood calcium, decreases the level of blood phosphates. It does that by acting on the bones, the kidneys, and intestines. Indirectly, it stimulates absorption of calcium by stimulating a step in vitamin D metabolism. And parathyroid hormone acts on the kidney to cause the final step in the production of active vitamin C, which is also called calcitriol or dihydroxyluciferase. Parathyroid hormone, unlike calcitonin, is very important in calcium regulation. So as blood levels drop, the calcium level, as calcium levels go up in the and as calcium levels go up in the blood, the parathyroid glands release calcitonin to the bloodstream. Not calcitonin, release parathyroid hormone to the bloodstream. And that parathyroid hormone stimulates the bones to release calcium. All right, we're going to cut this and start one more time. Okay, so we've got a case where we got low calcium in the blood. That low calcium in the blood triggers the parathyroid gland to release parathyroid hormone. Parathyroid hormone gets into the blood, acts on the bones, causes them to release calcium. It acts on the kidneys, causing them to conserve calcium. And it acts on the intestines to absorb calcium from the diet. So these three things will increase the amount of calcium in the blood, and when you increase the amount of calcium in the blood, you inhibit the release of parathyroid hormone. I hope I didn't mess you up too much on that. Disorders of the parathyroid include hyperparathyroidosis or hypoparathyroidism. Hyper would be fatigue, muscle weakness, painful joints. That's usually caused by a tumor. Removal of the tumor generally corrects the problem. And you may have to correct bone deformities as well. Hypothyroidism is very interesting. It's usually the result of accidentally removing the parathyroid gland during surgery or by an injury. And one of the reasons we know about the parathyroid gland is that when the thyroid had to be removed originally because of thyroid tumors, they took the whole thing, and people were starting to suffer from hypoparathyroidism, and it took a while to figure out why. That's how parathyroid hormone and parathyroid gland itself was discovered initially. And I will end that there. Try to anyway.